Good evening, everyone. This is the Legislature today. My name is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of our show, and we're going to be speaking this evening to representatives of the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. We're going to be talking about how the state oil production tax is distributed amongst local units of government. This is an extremely important issue in the legislature because obviously oil industry growth and expansion have created a number of issues for local governments to deal with, be it road repair, school enrollment, law enforcement, you name it. The expansion of the oil industry in western North Dakota has caused local governments, local governments in western North Dakota a new source of heartburn. And of course, heartburn can be cured by money. And one of the issues of the legislature is how much money, how much of the oil tax collections that the state normally gets should be turned back to local governments to allow them to grapple with the issues that are brought about by the expansion of the oil industry. Before we get to our guest this evening, I'd like to give you a bit of a rundown as to what happened in the legislature today. The House, in its floor session, dealt with a couple of bills of note. One of them was a proposed increase in the minimum wage. North Dakota's minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It's the same as the federal minimum wage. A Fargo legislator, is a Democrat by the name of Steve Zeiser, he introduced a bill to index the minimum wage to inflation and have it changed every year, increased by the inflation rate. This bill was defeated 70-24. Mr. Zeiser made the argument that even though wages have been rising in North Dakota and the economy is good, there are still about 6,000 people who are still making only the minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Mr. Zeiser, his argument was a bit outnumbered by counter-arguments that the competition for labor in North Dakota has raised wages without any sort of government intervention needed, that the prevailing wage in Bismarck and Mandan is about $10 an hour, and that it's even higher in western North Dakota oil patch counties. And if the bill had been in effect in 1998 when the state and federal minimum wage is $5.15 an hour, and it had been adjusted for inflation since then, it would still be well below the prevailing wages that are already being paid. In other words, the argument which was made by Bismarck Representative Rick Becker prevailed that the free market in wages has resulted in wage growth, and that a increase in the state minimum wage was not needed, and that bill was defeated 70-24. One bill that was passed in the House, and it now goes to the Senate, would affect anyone who likes to sign or wants to sign a referendum, a recall, or a referral petition. It requires the person signing the petition to print his or her name as well as to sign his or her name, as I think it's probably true with a lot of folks that their signature and their printed name are two completely different things in terms of readability. And the House unanimously approved this bill, which was requested by the Secretary of State, Al Jaeger, to require folks who sign referendum, recall, and referral petitions to print their names as well as sign them. Now the Senate will take up that issue. In the House, again, the House defeated a completely unrelated bill about the game and fish hunting and fishing license fees. This bill would have given the director of the Game and Fish Department the authority to increase hunting and fishing license fees by up to 20% every 2 years, as long as the Game and Fish Department's reserve fund stayed below $27 million. There were a number of hunting and fishing enthusiasts who supported this bill and said that it gave the Game and Fish Director flexibility that's needed to raise fees in cases of high demand and also in cases where the game and fish reserve funds might be dwindling more than would be desired normally. But the prevailing side, and the vote was 67 to 26 to defeat this bill, the prevailing side argued that the power to raise hunting and fishing fees should remain with the legislature and that should not be given to someone who's appointed by the governor or anyone else. The most pungent argument along these lines was made by Representative Wes Belter, who is the chairman of the House Finance and Tax Committee, who said that the legislature has had a habit, frankly, of giving away its power to the executive branch, and that should stop. And also, if hunting and fishing license fees were increased, that the legislature would get blamed for this by anyone who might be upset by that action, and so therefore the legislature should at least be responsible for doing it and not take the blame for something that it had no role in doing. In the Senate's agenda was a bit shorter and lighter. There was one bill that attracted a bit of debate about increasing the distance from which an oil well must be from a residence when it is drilled. Right now, an oil well can't be drilled closer than 500 feet from an occupied residence in western North Dakota. So the setback is now 500 feet. It used to be 300 feet. It was moved to 500 feet recently. The legislation that the Senate defeated today would have increased that setback to 750 feet for a single pad oil well. In other words, a pad that was being used to drill one oil well. A pad or installation that was to be used to drill more than one oil well would have had to have been set back 1,000 feet. The principal arguer against this change was one of the senators from the oil patch, Williston Senator Stan Leeson, who said that this would crimp oil development and that he has not heard a great deal of reports about oil well accidents and things of this nature that would affect nearby residents. Of course, some folks pointed out to him that there have been some accidents, but Senator Leeson said the number of accidents is relatively small when you compare it to the number of oil wells, the thousands of oil wells that have been drilled and are producing wells and producing oil in western North Dakota. This evening, this is our sponsored hour, and our sponsor is the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, and we speak on one evening a week during the legislature day on issues of interest to this association, which frankly are issues of interest to the entire state of North Dakota, given the importance of oil development in our state. And this evening we have as our guests Representative Bob Skarphol. He's a Republican from Tioga. He is a chairman of a House Appropriations Subcommittee that deals with education and environment issues in the North Dakota House. The Appropriations Committee is responsible for helping to draft the budget for North Dakota state government for the next 2 years, so it is a very influential committee, and Representative Skarphol is one of its chairmen. We also have the estimable Brady Pelton, who is a deputy director of the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, and we're going to speak to him as well as Representative Skarphol, although we'll kind of give Representative Skarphol most of the screen time here because he's got more to say than Brady does. Well, I'm just kidding. Anyway, Representative Skarphol, one of the things we wanted to talk about this evening is how the gross production tax on oil is divided up amongst local governments and how it's done now and how it is proposed to be done. And could you tell us, first of all, what is the oil production tax?
Well, the gross production tax is the first 5 cents of tax collected by the state of North Dakota, or 5% collected by the state of North Dakota. There are two taxes, gross production at 5% and the extraction tax at 6.5%.
And where does the oil production tax proceeds go now?
Well, the first penny goes to the state. Out of the 5 cents, the first penny goes to the state. The other 4 cents are the origin of the money that goes to the political subdivisions and is distributed through a formula to those political subdivisions. And the balance that is not distributed goes to the state.
And the amount that goes to the local governments, how is that split up?
Under the existing formula, there is a three-way split, to make it simple. There's 45% goes to the county, 35% goes to the school, and 20% goes to the state.
Are there any proposals to change how that is divided up?
Definitely. Yesterday, I believe it was, I introduced House Bill 1358 in the House Finance and Tax Committee. And, it's been a cooperative and collaborative effort between a lot of people. Western legislators got involved. Personally, I've been working on it for probably somewhere in excess of 6-7 months. They asked if we could get together and talk about a proposal for us to bring forward, and I was certainly amenable to that. And we've had several meetings in which we discussed the things that we wanted to try to accomplish. And I guess I was kind of appointed the construction superintendent to design the bill and get it created to bring it to the committee.
How does this bill change how things are done now?
It's going to make, if we can get it passed in its current form, it'll make a substantial difference in the amount of money that goes back to the political subdivisions over the next biennium. And the intent of the legislation, and one of the statements at the very end, is that the legislative intent of this proposal is that it be a 10-year plan. And we're hopeful to keep that in the bill and and in all reality have it be that 10-year plan or long-term plan to help, reconstruct the destruction, is how I put it, that's happened in western North Dakota with the development out there.
And why are changes needed, in your opinion, and how the money is distributed?
We've been accused of not funding enough infrastructure repair in western North Dakota, but very honestly, with hindsight, I think the rate at which we have increased the amount of money, in my mind at least, has probably been appropriate, not necessarily by design, but by accident. And I say that because in the 2011 session, when it was over, I was fearful that the increases that we'd given at that time would only result in us getting higher priced roads built rather than more roads built as a result of the money we put out there. And Montreal County, for example, bid some projects right after the session. And what happened is they got 2 and 3 bids on a project, and they come in at 30 to 40% over the engineer's estimates. They rejected the bids, thinking we weren't going to accept that kind of gouging. A few months later, they went back and rebid the projects. They got between 8 and 12 bids per project at 20% under the same engineer's estimates. So the contractors nationally realized there was work here and started to move in, and the net result was that we got good return on the dollars we invested. And from at least my perspective, and I believe the perspective of my colleagues in the West, we believe that this money has been spent wisely, used wisely by those political subdivisions, and therefore they need the opportunity to have more, to get more work done over the next 2 years than they've been able to do in the last 2.
And what sort of work has been done by this money, with this money so far?
Most of it has been invested in road construction, rebuilding that infrastructure that I talked about earlier. But I mean, the money's used in a lot of ways. Montreal County had need for a new shop building for their road equipment and repairing their road equipment and so forth. And they spent, I think, several $1 million building a new shop building. It's entirely appropriate. I mean, you have to have a place to upgrade and maintain your equipment through the winter so you're ready to go to work in the spring. They've rebuilt multiple miles of road that had to be reconstructed, not just upgraded, because of the fact that most of these roads were built at a time when the compaction was insufficient to be able to provide the substructure to carry that 105.5 load.
Why is it that, aside from everything else, why is it that building roads in western North Dakota, doing this construction, is generally more expensive than it has been? Is it because the roads have to be tougher, have to be able to bear more weight?
And that's exactly what has to happen. You know, in the conversations that I had, and I'm not a road engineer, so I wasn't familiar with these terms, but it became apparent to me in my conversations that from talking with the engineers that they referred to compaction levels, grade A, B, and C. And in the past, grade C was thought to be sufficient. Then they thought, well, maybe grade B will be good enough. And it became obvious now over the last 2 years that grade A is what we have to do in order to make sure, like I said, that substructure underneath that road is firmly put in place so that the road bed will not move over the next 20 to 30 year lifespan, to where we have the high quality road and won't have to reinvest in rebuilding the same road more often.
You mentioned a 10-year plan. Is that going to be sufficient to do what needs to be done?
Well, in putting this proposal together, as I said, I've talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people have talked to me. And one of the people that I relied on heavily was a county commissioner out of Montreal County by the name of David Hennick. I have a lot of respect for David, and I trust his word. And in the conversations that I had with him, he said that by his estimates, Montreal County needs $60 million a year for the next 10 years to fix the roads in Montreal County. And what I designed in 1358 in conjunction with my colleagues delivers about that much money to Montreal County, and it will deliver a proportionate amount of money to all of the counties that exceed $5 million in revenue coming into those counties annually.
How much discretion do these counties have to spend this money as they see fit?
They have all the discretion that they need. I mean, we don't put restrictions on it. The only thing we ask is they report to us how it was used. And on an annual basis, they report back on how that money's used. Initially, there was a little concern with that because the reporting was inconsistent. We've fixed that. They've worked and they've put it together, and they are reflecting what they do with it. And like I said, you know, I don't have an issue with the county doing what they need to do. We're hopeful they're building a lot of road, but we also understand that some of this money has to be used for other things, for example, law enforcement, EMS, fire departments. And the formula change we're recommending addresses some of those things because we changed how that money is distributed from the existing formula.
How does it change it from the existing formula?
Well, as I said earlier, it was 45, 35, 20. And in doing the work on this, it became obvious that if we're going to have the kind of revenue going to the counties that both the governors talked about, it giving them the first $5 million and 25% over that, and this is a little different and gives them a little more, but not a lot. It became apparent that we couldn't give 35% to schools because we would have wreaked havoc on the equity formula and funding higher education, K-12 education. So there had to be a different distribution created. And rather than 45, 35, 20, we've switched it to 60 to the counties. We maintain the 20 to the cities. We give 7.5% to townships, 5% to schools, plus $1.75 million additional to the 5% for every county over $5 million, and then 2.5% to EMS, fire departments, and law enforcement.
How much demand is there for this money from emergency services providers and law enforcement?
Emergency providers in western North Dakota are getting burned out because of the fact that they don't get to rest. And there's a very sincere, genuine need for some full-time people to man several of our EMS services in western North Dakota in communities like Watford City, Tioga, Stanley, Newtown, Bowman. I mean, there's a lot of need for full-time people, and what we've designed in this piece of legislation in 1358 is the ability to do that with the dollars that this formula will generate. And there's an understanding on the part of the political subdivisions out there that as the revenue goes down, there will be a date at some point in time in the future when they likely will have to let go of that full-time person because the revenue's not going to be there unless they want to commit some other source of revenue to covering those costs.
To what extent, I mean, we talked about a 10-year road construction program. Once the 10 years is up, I mean, what I'm getting at is there an end in sight in terms of having to rebuild roads? Is it something that can be accomplished in a time certain, given the amount of money that is needed to do that?
Two sessions ago, the Association of Oil and Gas Counties contracted with the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute to do some work to try to help substantiate the road needs. This last interim, we as a state hired them to do even more work. And their report said to us that over the next 10 years, or maybe it's a little longer than that, maybe it's 2025, I don't remember exactly, we need to spend $7 billion rebuilding roads in western oil counties and the balance of the state. This proposal is designed to try to live up to what the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute recommended for the next 2 years. It falls just a little short, I really admit that, but there's money in here for the non-oil counties as well, not just oil, but non-oil, and it's significant. The original appropriation for non-oil counties was $250 million in here. We passed 2176. It granted $80 million. I'm still pushing to get the balance, the $170 million, to get the full $250 to the non-oil counties. This will deliver the $500 million plus that the oil counties need.
And to what extent has this approach that you're advocating gotten support amongst your colleagues?
Well, I guess, my sense of the reception it received from finance and tax, and I spent an hour presenting the bill, and then I was followed by another hour and 20, 30 minutes of people supporting it, and a wide variety of people from across the state. So I'm very optimistic about that we're going to make significant change. Whether or not it's going to be exactly like it's drafted, I don't know. You know how this is. It's making sausage.
It is indeed. Sausage, and very tasty sausage at that. We've been speaking this evening with Representative Bob Skarphol. He's a Republican from Tioga. He represents 3 counties and part of a 4th county in northwestern North Dakota, in the northwestern corner, one of North Dakota's big oil-producing regions. And we have with us Brady Pelton, who's the Deputy Director of the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. We are speaking about how to split up state oil revenues and divert a larger share back to local governments to repair or to deal with the impact of oil development and the oil industry expansion in western North Dakota. This is the Legislature Today radio program. My name is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host. And we have as our guest this evening Representative Bob Skarphol. He's a Republican from Tioga. He represents a rural district that includes 3 counties, most of 3 counties, and part of a 4th county in northwestern North Dakota, the corner of the state, the northwestern corner. We also have the Deputy Director of the North Dakota Oil and Gas Producing Counties, Mr. Brady Pelton. The North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties is the sponsoring organization for the second hour of our broadcast, and we're grateful for them to make that commitment. And we're talking about issues that are important to oil and gas producing counties and also to the state of North Dakota, because, as everyone knows, the oil and gas industry is quite significant and important to the state of North Dakota as a whole. Representative Skarphol, we were talking earlier about the division of the state's oil production tax and increasing the share of that money that goes back to local governments. We also have something that we wanted to discuss, talking a hub cities concept. And can you tell me what that's about, please?
Well, Dale, in developing this, in the discussions that we had, it's very apparent that Williston is the epicenter of what's happening in the oil industry. And the effects of it on that community have been devastating. So in putting this together, we tried to put together what we thought was a comprehensive infrastructure plan for western North Dakota. And the hub city model would take Williston and Dickinson and any community in excess of 12,500 people out of the current funding formula and create a new model and a new funding source for those cities. And in the case of Williston, in thinking about this and developing this, and in listening to what I was hearing locally on the news, Williston was $30 million short of the revenue they needed to cover their expenses for the year in their budget discussions. $30 million. So I picked a $30 million figure as the number we should do for Williston. And then in the previous session, we had a proposal that relied on the job service classification percentages for oil and what's called mining, which is oil and gas, as a basis for a hub city potential model. And in Williston's case, that's 40%. So to give Williston $30 million a year with a 40% employment rate takes $750,000 per percentage. So I put that in place, and then we looked at what does that provide for Dickinson. Well, for Dickinson, it provides $12,750,000 a year. For Minot, it provides $3 million a year, but it isn't exclusive to those communities. Mandan, for example, would be included in this because of the provisions in the bill and the refinery in Mandan. So any city above 12,500 people in North Dakota who has 1% or more of their employed workforce in oil and gas or mining would be eligible for a payment. In addition to the payment to the schools, there's a payment to the city. There's a payment to the schools, and that payment's equal to 1/3 of whatever the schools get, and divided into some categories with some caveats. Because again, we can't give $10 million to the Williston school, but we give them a significant chunk of money in addition to what they're currently getting as a grant, and then the balance of the money is held in abeyance for a couple different qualifying situations. For example, to match any building dollars that they put forward, for example, in a bonding issue, or for extraordinary expenses needed to mitigate the negative effects of oil impact is the other category. So we think we've come up with a model that does the right thing. And I go back to Williston because during the 80s, when the boom came, it devastated the city of Williston, and their bond rating was reduced. And the city of Williston has worked for a lot of years to rebuild that bond rating, finally got it rebuilt, and now it got downgraded again because the bonding company says you don't have enough revenue to substantiate your needs, so we're going to downgrade your bond rating. So there was a genuine need for the city of Williston to have some revenue that was reliable, as a revenue stream to come from a formula. Granting them money from an impact fund, as has been done in the past, is not sufficient to give that reliability to a bonding company. So it's imperative that the things that we've put together in here, in my mind, need to happen. Whether or not to the extent we have them can be arguable, but I will argue viciously that we've done the right thing.
What can the hub cities use this money for? Anything
they want. And very honestly, what they're doing is building the major links out to the developments. The developments are responsible for what needs to be done within the development. All they're doing is providing the major water line going to that development, the major sewer line going to that development. They've learned from past experience that the city should not be the ones that funding the developments themselves. They have to provide the major infrastructure. They have to take care of their roads. They have to hire the people they need to provide city services. Their employment numbers have gone up tremendously due to the fact of the demand of services.
Does the money that they will get through these hub distributions, is that going to be sufficient for them to do what needs to be done?
Well, it will certainly go a long ways in helping them. I'm not saying it's sufficient, because what it will enable them to do is to bond to do the things that need to get done, at least to some extent. Now, in this legislation as well, there's $150 million for the impact fund. There are no restrictions on it. The advisory committee that's going to make the decisions on how that used could give $10 million to Williston, $10 million to Minot, $10 million to Dickinson. They can do whatever they deem to be appropriate based on their best judgment.
Now, is this an approach that's already being done, or is it something that's proposed?
Well, this is proposed. The impact fund, the granting of funds from the impact fund, has been done. The distribution has existed for political subdivisions, but this is a major change. This is a major change, and it dramatically increases the dollars going to those subdivisions. In the past, it was 100% of the first $2 million, 75% of the next $2 million. It was much more limited, and the governor proposed virtually the same model as far as the money that's going to get distributed. This is different in his in that it's more comprehensive, and it lays it out so that you have assured funding for EMS, so that the Wattsfords and the Tiogas can have an advisory committee that can say, we're going to make sure you have money to pay for the cost of full-time people, one full-time person, maybe 1.5, to work in these communities.
We have with us this evening on the telephone Mr. Steve Holen, who is the Superintendent for the Watford City School District, Mr. Holen. Can you hear me?
Yep, I'm here, Dale.
Okay, Mr. Holen, could you you've been listening to our conversation about the Hub Cities approach and how it would benefit school districts. Could you describe for us what you can do with the money that you'll be able to receive should this approach be approved by the legislature?
Yeah, well, the exciting thing about House Bill 1358 by far is the fact that it really does change the way schools are handled within the formula. Up to this point, when we reached the cap in our higher producing counties, revenue was put to the infrastructure fund, of which we could apply for grants, and those grants can be used only for buses and repair on buses. What this does is gets us into, and Representative Skarphol said it very well, it's a consistent, regular source of revenue that will come to school districts in the terms of 5%. And for us to use for any capacity, many of us have been using it for bonding issues, for bond ratings on getting our infrastructure up to place, because many of us are looking at substantial facility upgrades and infrastructure projects to address the rapid student enrollment growth. So it's a great change for schools, and I commend Representative Skarphol for putting us back in that formula to get beyond that cap. Many didn't realize that our school district, Watford City, we've been receiving the same revenue from the production tax since 2005. So it was difficult to keep up with the impacts that we've seen since 2005 on the same revenue from the production tax. So it's really exciting to see that change. The Hub Cities also addresses the net inequity with some of our smaller school districts in the Williams and Stark counties that had to share that production tax with that Hub City because it's based on attendance. So there's a couple of really nice things that happen for schools, both large and small.
Mr. Holen, could you describe for us what you intend to use the money for in Watford City? Do you intend to use it to raise teacher salaries, to build buildings, to renovate buildings? What sort of projects do you have in mind for this money?
Well, probably all of the above. I mean, our school district is currently in a school construction project for an addition and renovation of our elementary school building to add another about 175 student capacity to that building. And that was done by the school board on purchasing $11.5 million in bonds. So we have to find a revenue source in order to pay those bonds back now over a 20-year period of time. At the same time, there was an NDSU study funded for schools through the oil and gas producing counties, as well as the Vision West studies that have been done that are showing some of our school districts, in particular ours, that are going to see substantial growth. One of the studies showed up to 9,000 permanent homes within the Watford City area. So even though the ratio of students per household is low now, when it comes back to a normal rating, we're going to see some substantial growth. And so we're trying to plan, we're trying to address infrastructure issues of what do we do when we reach these capacities, how do we going to configure grade, how do we keep classroom sizes low, how do we attract teachers in this environment, which is a very substantial challenge. We're adding upwards of 6 to 7 new positions every year, and then we fight a housing problem as well. So there's certainly a lot of issues and a lot of reasons we need a consistent revenue that we can budget for. The impact funds are great, but we need to be able to budget for something substantial that we can do this planning with.
Sir, could you tell us what was the enrollment in your school districts approximately 6 years ago, or just before the boom, and what is it at presently?
Sure. Yeah, we were about 525 probably about 6 years ago, and that was the lowest we'd been in quite some time. That's in the grades K through 12. Right now we're about 807. And that almost all of that growth happened between the spring of 2010 and now. So in about a 2.5 year, getting on a 3-year period of time now, we saw that 60% growth of 300 kids. And we mediated that initially with, kind of filling up the building that had some space after years of declining enrollment. But we've obviously reached that capacity now and obviously forced us to go into a building project. So that kind of growth for us is substantial. You go from 2 sections to 3 sections to 4 sections. you're adding multiple teachers at one time and trying to find space for them.
And how many, you mentioned 6 years ago you had 525 students. How many teachers did you have then, and how many teachers do you have now?
Yeah, we had about 42 full-time equivalencies, and at this time we're about 59. So we've added substantial teachers since then. We went from 2 sections to a kindergarten classroom to 4 in grades K through 2. And then we've added specialty services, ELL as being one of them we added this year to meet the demands of kind of the new demographic that we're receiving of students. So, yeah, there's no question that our staffing needs have been substantial.
What sort of programs, sir, have you had to offer as a result of your enrollment growth that you did not have to offer before?
Well, I mentioned ELL services. We also added what we called an at-risk coordinator, many intervention-type positions, basically to mediate the fact that we had students coming in at varying levels to try to catch them up, not that they were all behind, but certainly when you get the mobility that you receive, that you're going to get many students coming in at varying levels. And most of our staffing, some of them special ed related, have been to address kind of that new demographic and trying to level the playing field of the variety of students that we're getting in. That's been a vast majority of it. We've also added some programs to deal with reading levels and so forth to bring students up to what we would consider proficient levels for our district.
Could you please explain for us, Mr. Holen, what ELL is?
English language learners. They are students that come in that English is not their first language of use. So they struggle with the English language. Many that receive Spanish as their first language of choice and the language that they use in the home. It's the primary language of their parents at home. So the program then has to deal with that language barrier in being able to educate those students. And we probably have approximately about a dozen students now in that program, and that's a program that did not exist 2 years ago.
I was going to say, you didn't have, before the boom started, you did not have a situation where you had students in your school with whom, or you did not have students in your school that were not native English speakers.
That's correct. Yep, that is a completely new demographic that we've had to address.
What sort of construction or space additions have you had to make as a result of your enrollment growth recently?
Well, the first thing we did at elementary school is basically take any space that had been renovated into something else over the years, which had been teacher workrooms, storage areas, and even computer labs. We took all of those areas that conceivably be a classroom and put them back as a classroom. So we really just maximized that building to its absolute potential. With that said, we also had to add a portable classroom this last year to address the enrollment at the elementary level. And then now the fall of 2013, we're going to have the addition open. That'll allow us to expand up to about 600 kids in that building. So we've done that. We've also moved our 6th grade students up to the high school building. And that's something we just simply had to do. Something we would have never thought of years ago. So we have grades K through 5 in that building and then moved the 6th grade to the high school because they had some more capacity in this building. So you have 870 students now presently. What do you project your enrollment to be in, say, the next 5 years? That's a great question. And, one of the things we've done is our district has hired a demographer that has worked in the state that worked for bigger districts of Bismarck, Mandan, Fargo, West Fargo to help us with that process. But just basing it on the developments that are occurring, when you talk to our mayor, you're looking at what we used to be 1,500 people in Wofford City, about 7 developments around Wofford City of that same size. So you start to compare yourself to districts of, that would represent a population of 10,000 possibly, and that could mean that it's conceivable we could double, that you could get to that 14, 15, 1,600 number. In the previous boom, we were a little over 1,200, and we certainly think that this one could go higher than that.
We're speaking this evening with Mr. Steve Holen. He is the Superintendent of Schools in Watford City in McKenzie County in northwestern North Dakota in the heart of the oil boom. We've also been speaking to R-Tioga Representative Bob Skarphol, who represents a rural district in North Dakota's northwestern corner. We also have with us Mr. Brady Pelton, the Deputy Director of the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, which is the sponsoring organization for the second hour of our broadcast of the legislature today. Mr. Holen, which would you rather do? I mean, well, just first of all, is it fun to deal with the problems of growth, or just describe what it's like to manage a growing school district in rural North Dakota?
Well, I would like to think of it as fun. I guess I've always said that, would I rather be growing or declining, of which we've experienced both. And declining is no fun. I mean, obviously, the opportunities that you can provide in your community and to students are greater with growth. And so with that said, certainly, I would pick growth. There's an amount of excitement with it. I think it's a transitional period. I think initially you get hit with so many impacts that many people think that, we just want to go back to the way it was. But I think as leaders, we try to see, there's tremendous opportunity with this growth. And our job is just quite simply to make the best of it. So in simple language, I do have more fun hiring teachers than firing them and riffing them due to declining enrollment. And when I entered the district in 2005, we were looking to possibly move all our enrollment into one building and prepare for a major decline. So being able to add buildings now is quite a change in a short period of time. But it is exciting. The challenges are tremendous, probably about equal to. But at least there is opportunity in that you try to focus on.
How do you find places for the teachers to live, sir?
That's a great one. I think almost every district in the Northwest here that I'm aware of, we had to invest in our own housing. And we resisted that as much as possible. We bought 8 units for our teachers to live in. We just now this school year invested with the city and the county into some housing in our city to possibly house some additional teachers as well. And it's a real problem, and there's been no other, the pace of which the development is happening is unable to keep up, and the affordable levels of housing has been truly the issue. When I heard earlier, you talked about minimum salaries and so forth, you have teachers coming in at $35,000, $40,000, and having to face rents of $15,000 to $2,000. It just doesn't work. So you have to control your own destiny to a point and get involved in housing, which we never really wanted to, but you do what you have to do.
Sir, as you know, the legislature is debating a rather comprehensive and sweeping new education finance bill. Do you have any feel for how this will affect the Watford City District in particular?
Well, I think it's got some potential. When you look at what it's trying to accomplish as far as adequacy and tax reform, those are obviously admirable goals, and I think it can have a positive effect. The concerns we have in my district, one of the things that when you talk about getting down to 50 mills, our current mill levy right now in our general fund is 53. And the reason for that is because we've increased to the max every year for the last 2 years, which is 12%. And because of the rapidly increasing valuations, our mill levy has dropped tremendously. We were at over 100 mills of 2 years ago. So we're concerned in the 50 mills, one of the aspects being if we're able to maintain those 50 mills, since the formula is based on every school being able to levy 50. As hard as that is to believe, we might have a challenge in levying 50 mills because valuations may increase fast enough that the 12% doesn't allow us to stay there. So that's obviously a concern for us. I think the new proposed formula does address in lieu of revenue for minerals, and we are conscious of that. It is a local revenue for us, but it's certainly a different aspect of revenue, and we hope the formula treats that appropriately, and I think that it's got a factor in it for that. So to me, I think that, the adequacy part is great. Equity is extremely difficult to define and to articulate. There's so many different characteristics in schools, but certainly adequacy is a goal that's admirable, and so I hope we fare well. I think we might, but there's some things, as I mentioned before, that maybe need to be tweaked to make sure it's as good a bill as it can be.
Sir, we have about a minute left. Could you talk about, I mean, you mentioned your growing enrollment. To what extent is there, I guess I would call it, for want of a better term, churn? I mean, are you having students arrive and then also students leave at the same time as families move away?
Absolutely. A very high level of that. Kind of a staggering statistic for us is that this school year, we've enrolled 333 new students in our district. The reason that we're not up by that many students is because of that churn you talk about. So, we're losing students at a rate, not as fast as we're increasing them, but certainly it's decreasing the amount of net students we're getting. And I think a lot of that probably has to do with the housing. I think we're reaching levels now where, the current level of housing is supporting as much as it can. And new students are coming in, but they're replacing those that couldn't find housing or are just unwilling to stay until that housing is available. So
Thank you.
We also have 115 students that are in transitional homes that are considered homeless by McKinney-Vento.
Thank you for your time, Mr.
Sure.
Holen. We do appreciate your time. We've been talking to Steve Holen, the superintendent of the Watford City School District in northwestern North Dakota. Also, we've been speaking to Representative Bob Skarphol of Tioga, who represents a district in rural northwestern North Dakota, and he's involved in trying to get more money for local governments in North Dakota's oil boom area. This hour has been brought to you by the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties.